Mom walked into my room and said, "Pack your stuff. Your sister's pregnant and she's going to need the bigger room." When she suggested I stay in the basement, I replied, "Why, I just bought a house. I've been aware for as long as I can remember that I wasn't really wanted. I was the accident, the mistake, the kid they didn't plan on." I've known this ever since I was old enough to understand words, and my parents made it clear enough without even trying. My sister, however, was different. Lily was planned, wanted, anticipated. I remember overhearing them talking when I was younger, their voices drifting through the walls as if they didn't care who heard. "She's perfect," my mom would say, and my dad would nod, agreeing with every word. "She's exactly what we hoped for." It didn't matter that I was right there, just a room away. I knew she was everything they'd ever wanted, and I was just there. Lily was the golden child, and I was just their other kid, a shadow that they barely acknowledged. It wasn't just the words either. It was in everything they did, every choice they made, every single day. They showered her with attention and praise. Every little thing she did was a miracle. When she took her first steps, they called up the entire extended family to announce it. I barely remember my first steps. Nobody recorded them. Nobody cheered. And it went on like that for as long as I can remember. I grew up in a house that in every sense didn't really feel like my home. My room was tucked away in the far corner of the house, small and cramped, a narrow strip of space with a tiny bed, a creaky dresser, and a shelf that leaned slightly to one side. I used to joke to myself that it was where they put me because they wanted to forget I existed. My room was like an afterthought, a storage closet they converted when they realized they had to keep me somewhere. Lily, of course, had a room that could have been on the cover of a magazine. She had a canopy bed with fluffy pink bedding, fairy lights strung around her room, and shelves lined with dolls and stuffed animals. Her room looked like it had been curated by an interior designer, every detail carefully chosen to suit her, to make her feel special. It was the kind of room a princess would have, a room that screamed, "You're important. You're loved." And then there was my room, which barely had enough space for me to turn around in. The walls were painted this dreary shade of beige that hadn't been updated since I was born. I tried to put up posters once, but they just peeled off because of the old paint. I eventually gave up trying to make it look nice. I figured there wasn't much point in pretending that it was anything other than what it was, a place they'd put me when they didn't know what else to do with me. When it came to things like clothes and toys, it was always clear who was the favorite. Lily would get brand new outfits, colorful dresses with matching shoes and accessories. She had closets full of clothes, more than she could ever wear. I, on the other hand, was handed down clothes from cousins, friends, even neighbors who were getting rid of their old stuff. I remember wearing shirts that were too tight, pants that were too short, shoes that were falling apart. They'd give me things like I was some charity case, like I should be grateful to have anything at all. Birthdays were the worst. I'd watch as they threw lavish parties for Lily, inviting everyone from her school, decorating the whole house with balloons and streamers, renting bounce houses and magicians. For my birthdays, they'd throw together something last minute, maybe buy a cake from the grocery store, light a candle, and call it a day. No friends, no decorations, no sense that it was a day worth celebrating. They'd just pat me on the back, say happy birthday, and move on like it was just another Tuesday. Even my achievements went unnoticed. In school, I worked hard. I put in the effort, stayed up late studying, got good grades. I once won an award for a science fair project. I remember coming home, holding the certificate in my hands, feeling this rare surge of pride. I thought maybe this will be the thing that makes them see me, that makes them realize I'm worth something. But when I showed them, they barely glanced at it. My dad said something like, "Good job, keep it up," without even looking away from his phone. My mom smiled politely, but it was the kind of smile you give when you're not really listening. When Lily got an A on a test, though, it was like she'd won the Nobel Prize. They'd take her out to dinner, tell everyone they knew, brag about how smart their daughter was. But when it came to me, my accomplishments were just shrugged off, treated like they were nothing special. I could have been a straight-A student, a child prodigy, and it wouldn't have mattered. They didn't want me. They never wanted me. I was just there. I remember trying to talk to them about it once, to ask why things were the way they were. I must have been about 12, old enough to know that something was wrong, but still young enough to think that maybe I could change it. I asked my mom why they always treated Lily differently, why she got everything and I got nothing. She looked at me with this tired expression, like I was a burden just for asking. "Look," she said, "we're doing the best we can. Lily needs things that you don't. She's special." It was the way she said it, the casual dismissal, that stung the most. She didn't even try to hide it. She didn't deny that Lily was the favorite, didn't pretend to care about my feelings. She just said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, like it was a fact that I should have known all along. I think that was the moment I stopped trying. I realized then that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, how much I achieved, they were never going to see me. They'd made up their minds a long time ago. Lily was their golden child, the one they'd wanted, the one they loved. And I was just the other kid, the one they hadn't planned for, the one they could barely tolerate. I started spending more and more time in my room, isolating myself from them, retreating into my own little world. I'd lose myself in books, video games, anything that could take me away from the reality of my life. My room might have been small and cramped, but at least it was mine. It was the one place where I could be alone, where I didn't have to watch them fawn over Lily, where I didn't have to feel like an outsider in my own family. Over the years, I learned to stop caring about their approval. I poured myself into my studies not because I thought it would make them see me, but because it was the one thing I could control, the one area where I could prove to myself that I was worth something. I excelled, not for them, but for me. I became the top student in my class, won awards, earned scholarships, but I kept it all to myself. I knew they wouldn't care, so I stopped bothering to tell them. It was easier that way, easier to just go through the motions, to let them live in their little bubble, where Lily was the sun and I was just a shadow. Looking back, I can see how those years shaped me, how they taught me to rely on myself, to find my own worth. I learned to be independent, to build a life that didn't revolve around their validation. It wasn't easy, but it made me stronger. It taught me that I didn't need them, that I could carve out a place for myself in the world, even if they never noticed. I'm not sure if they ever realized the damage they did, if they even noticed the way they tore me down bit by bit until I was just a shell of who I could have been. Maybe they did, and they just didn't care. Or maybe they were so wrapped up in their own lives, in their own little world, that they never even saw me standing right in front of them. Either way, it doesn't matter now. I stopped needing them a long time ago. I learned to find my own way, to build my own sense of self, separate from the family that never wanted me. They can have their golden child, their perfect little Lily. I've learned to be okay with being on my own, to find strength in solitude, to take pride in the things I've accomplished on my own terms. Maybe they thought they were breaking me, pushing me down until I disappeared altogether, but all they did was make me stronger, more determined to prove that I didn't need them. They might have given me life, but they didn't give me purpose. That's something I found on my own, in the quiet moments, in the shadows, in the spaces they never bothered to look. And in a way, I'm grateful for it. Grateful for the isolation, for the neglect, for the way they pushed me away, because it taught me that I didn't need them, that I could stand on my own, that I could find my own path. And now as I look back on those years, I realize that I'm better off without them. I'm stronger, more resilient, and ready to face whatever comes next, and I don't need their approval, their love, or their attention to do it. I never did. My grandfather was the only real family I had. In a world where I was largely ignored and treated like a ghost, he was the one person who saw me, who valued me for who I was. He wasn't an overly expressive man, but he had a warmth about him that made me feel safe, a rare feeling in that house. He'd take me fishing on weekends or to the park, where we'd sit in companionable silence, and it felt like the whole world faded away, leaving just the two of us. He was the only one who ever asked about my day, who cared about the little things. He taught me how to ride a bike, how to tie a fishing knot, how to build a birdhouse. Those memories were my lifeline, the moments I clung to when I felt like I was drifting alone and unwanted. I remember one day in particular. Maybe I was about 10 when he took me to his favorite spot by the lake. We sat there, fishing poles in hand, and he turned to me with a smile. "You know you're a good kid," he said, patting my shoulder. "Don't let anyone make you feel like you're not. You've got a lot of heart, and that's something no one can take away from you." His words stuck with me more than he could ever know. In a house where I felt like an outsider, he made me feel like I belonged, even if it was just for a few stolen moments here and there. He never treated me like I was a burden, never looked at me like I was an afterthought. To him, I was enough just as I was. He'd slip me $1 or two now and then with a wink and a smile, telling me to go buy myself something nice. It was such a small gesture, but to me it was everything. He was the only one who ever made me feel special. But then he got sick. I was around 13 when he started to fade, and it was like watching my last anchor slowly drift away. The man who'd once been strong and steady, who'd carried me on his shoulders and taught me how to skip stones, was reduced to a shell of himself. I watched as he withered away each visit to the hospital, chipping away at the man I'd once known. And when he died, I felt like I'd lost the only piece of my family that mattered. The funeral was a blur. My parents were there, of course, but it felt like they were just going through the motions. They stood by the casket with dry eyes, murmuring polite condolences to people they barely knew. Lily, of course, was the center of attention as always. People fussed over her, asking if she was okay, as if she'd been the one who'd spent all those years with him. I stood there numb and alone, watching as they pretended to care. They moved on quickly as if nothing had happened. There were no whispered words of comfort, no gentle reminders that everything would be okay. I was left to grieve alone, to process the loss of the only person who'd ever truly seen me. My parents barely acknowledged it. They were too busy worrying about Lily as usual. I heard them talking about how she was taking it so hard, how she'd been so close to him. It was like a slap in the face, a reminder that no matter what I felt, no matter what I'd lost, it didn't matter. They only had room in their hearts for Lily. I spent more and more time in my room after that, retreating into myself, isolating from the rest of the house. My room, small and neglected as it was, became my sanctuary, the only place where I could be alone with my thoughts, where I could remember my grandfather without interruption. I'd sit there for hours replaying our memories, holding on to every fragment of him that I could. But even that small comfort was taken from me. Lily got pregnant when she was 16, and my parents decided that the only way to accommodate her new family was to take over my room. I'll never forget the way they told me. They didn't ask, didn't discuss it with me. My mom just came into my room one day and told me to pack up my things. "We need this space for Lily," she said, her tone matter-of-fact, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "She's going to need all the room she can get with the baby." I was stunned. I just stood there looking at her, trying to process what she was saying. "But where am I supposed to go?" She sighed, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "We've set up the basement for you. It'll be fine. You don't need much space anyway." And that was it. No discussion, no negotiation. I was exiled from the only room I'd ever called my own, sent to the damp, dark basement, while Lily moved into my space, taking over everything that had once been mine. They didn't even help me move my things. I was left to haul my bed, my dresser, my books, and whatever else I could carry down the narrow stairs to the basement, which they'd hastily thrown together as my new room. The basement was a joke. It was cold and damp. The walls lined with exposed pipes and old boxes. They'd thrown a worn-out mattress on the floor with a rickety table and a chair that looked like it had been dragged out of a dumpster. There was a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, flickering on and off like it couldn't decide if it wanted to stay on or plunge me into darkness. And they expected me to live there, to call it home, as if it was even remotely close to the comfort Lily had upstairs. The worst part was the dampness. I could feel it in the air, a cold, clinging moisture that seeped into my bones, making it impossible to feel warm. I'd wake up in the middle of the night shivering, pulling the thin blanket tighter around me, but it was never enough. I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house above me, the muffled laughter, the footsteps, the occasional burst of music. They were up there living their lives while I was down here forgotten and alone. The electricity was unreliable too. There were nights when the light would flicker and go out, plunging me into complete darkness. I'd sit there waiting for it to come back on, feeling the walls closing around me. I knew they didn't care if the lights stayed off, if the basement flooded, if I disappeared altogether. They wouldn't notice. They had Lily, and that was all that mattered to them. I tried to make the best of it, to turn the basement into something that felt like mine. I'd put up some posters, brought down a few of my books, tried to arrange the space in a way that made it feel less like a prison cell. But no matter what I did, it was still the basement. It was still a place they'd put me because they didn't have room for me in their lives. My grandfather would have never let it happen. He'd have fought for me, told them to find another way, made them see that I was worth more than a damp corner of the basement. But he was gone, and there was no one left to stand up for me. No one left to tell them that I mattered. So I stayed there night after night in the dark, damp basement, clinging to the memories of the only person who'd ever cared. I'd think about him, about the things he'd said, the way he'd made me feel like I was worth something, and I held on to those memories, even as the rest of the world turned its back on me. They could take my room, my comfort, my sense of security, but they couldn't take the memories of my grandfather. They couldn't take away the one thing that kept me going, the belief that somewhere deep inside I was worth more than they ever saw in me. And in the cold, lonely darkness of the basement, that was the only warmth I had. After a couple of years of enduring the basement, I realized that staying in that house, trying to pretend I was part of a family that didn't want me, wasn't an option anymore. I knew I had to get out to build a life on my terms, far from the toxic environment that had always held me back. So, at 17, I made up my mind. I was going to find a job and finally break free. I started searching around town, asking at different shops, diners, anywhere that would take someone with no experience but a lot of determination. One day, I wandered into a small mechanic shop on the edge of town. It was an unassuming place with a modest sign reading Tom's Auto Repair, but it smelled of oil and steel, and there was something about it that felt real. There I met Tom, the owner, a middle-aged man with a wiry frame, a gruff voice, and a perpetual grease stain on his hands. He looked me over with a raised eyebrow when I asked for work. "You know anything about cars, kid?" he asked, skeptical. "No," I admitted, "but I'm willing to learn. I'll work hard, whatever you need. I need a place to start." He studied me for a moment, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded almost reluctantly. "All right, I'll give you a shot. I could use an extra hand around here. Pays not much, but it's honest work." The job was tough, but I threw myself into it with everything I had. Tom turned out to be more than just a boss. He became a mentor, someone who taught me more than just how to fix cars. He showed me how to work with my hands, how to solve problems, and most importantly, how to believe in myself. He was tough, sure, but he was fair, and he treated me with a respect I hadn't known before. After a few weeks, I mentioned to Tom that I was still living at home, or rather in the basement. He didn't say much at the time, just nodded thoughtfully. But the next day he pulled me aside. "Got a spare room in the back," he said, scratching his chin. "It's nothing fancy, but it's got a bed and a door that locks. You're welcome to it if you want. Might be better than that basement you've been stuck in." I was stunned. I hadn't expected such generosity, and for a moment I didn't know what to say. "Are you sure? I don't want to be a burden." He waved a hand, dismissing my concerns. "Kid, I wouldn't offer if I didn't mean it. Besides, it's good to have someone around to help out. You need a place, and I could use the company." "So what do you say?" I accepted, and just like that, my life began to change. I moved into the small room at the back of the shop, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of freedom. It was a humble space, bare walls, a simple bed, a small dresser, but it was mine, and that made all the difference. I was no longer subject to the whims of my family. I had a place I could call my own, a roof over my head that wasn't tied to their neglect or their indifference. I worked hard at the shop, learning everything I could from Tom. He was patient, teaching me not just the mechanics of cars, but also how to run a business, how to deal with customers, how to take pride in a job well done. He gave me a purpose, something to strive for, and I threw myself into the work, determined to prove myself, to show that I could make something of my life. I saved every penny I earned, living frugally and setting aside as much as I could. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I was tempted to splurge to buy things I'd always wanted but never had. But I had a goal, a vision of a future where I could finally stand on my own, free from my family and their empty promises. After 3 years of hard work and saving, I had managed to set aside $20,000. I'd been careful, only spending what I needed, living in that small room at the shop, and gradually I'd built up a decent nest egg. I started looking at properties, dreaming of a place I could truly call my own, a home that I had built with my own 2 hands. I found a modest little house on the outskirts of town, a fixer-upper that had seen better days but had potential. The asking price was $660,000, and while I didn't have enough to buy it outright, I had saved enough for a solid down payment. I managed to secure a small loan, and with Tom's help and encouragement, I bought the house. It took 3 years of work, sweat, and sacrifice, but I finally had a place of my own. Renovating the house was a labor of love. I spent my evenings and weekends fixing it up, repairing the roof, painting the walls, laying down new flooring. It was hard work, but every nail I hammered, every wall I painted brought me one step closer to building the life I'd always dreamed of. It was mine, truly mine, and for the first time, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. Life was good. I had my independence, a job I loved, and a home that was all mine. I felt proud, accomplished, like I'd finally escaped the shadow of my past. But then, just when I thought I'd left that life behind, my family came back into the picture. It started with a phone call from my mother. She'd heard about the house, about the success I'd found on my own, and suddenly she was full of concern, as if she'd always been there for me. She asked about the house, about my work, her voice full of forced cheer, but I could hear the real reason beneath it all. They wanted back in. They wanted a piece of what I'd built. A few days later, they showed up unannounced, standing on my doorstep with Lily and the toddler. I opened the door, surprised to see them, and for a moment I just stood there staring at them, unsure of what to say. "Ethan," my mother said, stepping forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "we heard you've done so well for yourself. You've got this lovely house now, and Well, we thought it might be nice if we could all be together again. I knew what she was asking, even if she didn't say it outright. They wanted to move in to take advantage of the life I'd built, as if they'd always been a part of it, as if they'd played any role in my success. I looked at them, at Lily standing there with that same old smirk, and I felt a surge of anger, a reminder of everything they'd put me through, everything they'd taken from me. I don't think so, I said, my voice steady but firm. I built this on my own. I worked hard for this, and I'm not about to let you waltz back into my life now that it's convenient for you. My father's face turned red, a flash of anger in his eyes. We're family, he said, as if that word could erase all the years of neglect, all the nights I'd spent alone in the basement, all the times they'd chosen Lily over me. You can't just turn us away. I can and I am, I replied, crossing my arms. You didn't care about me then and you don't care about me now. You only care about what you can get from me. Well, I'm done. I don't need you and I don't owe you anything. My mother tried to protest, tried to guilt me, to remind me of all the things they'd supposedly done for me, but her words rang hollow, empty echoes of a past that I'd long since left behind. I'd built this life without them, and I wasn't about to let them take it from me. They left, their faces a mix of anger and disbelief, and as I watched them drive away, I felt a strange sense of relief, a weight lifting off my shoulders. I'd finally stood up for myself, finally broken free from the last ties that had bound me to that toxic family. I was my own person, independent, self-sufficient, and I had no intention of going back. As I closed the door and looked around my little house, I felt a surge of pride, a reminder of everything I'd accomplished, everything built from the ground up. This was my life, my success, and I'd earned it on my own terms. I didn't need them, and I never had. I had a home, a job, a future that was mine, and mine alone, and for the first time, I felt truly free. It was almost by accident that I discovered what my parents had done. One afternoon, as I was going through some old boxes in my basement, I stumbled across a file folder with my grandfather's handwriting on it. It was dusty and worn, and I hadn't seen it since before he passed away. I opened it up, and what I found inside left me both shocked and furious. The folder contained documents related to an inheritance he'd set aside for me, something I'd never known about until that moment. As I sifted through the paperwork, I began to piece together what he had left behind for me, a substantial sum of money meant to be used for my future. I couldn't believe it. My grandfather had left me a financial cushion, something to help me get started in life, to give me a foundation to build on, but I'd never seen a single cent of it. I took the documents to Mr. Grant, my lawyer, the same man who had helped me deal with my family's earlier attempt to ruin my business. He reviewed the paperwork, his expression growing darker by the minute as he went over the details. "This is serious, Ethan," he said, looking up from the pages. "It looks like your parents illegally accessed this inheritance, diverting it to accounts in your sister's name. They had no right to that money. It was yours, and they've misappropriated it." I sat there in stunned silence, a mix of anger and betrayal boiling within me. I couldn't believe they'd gone that far, that they'd stoop so low as to steal from me, to take what my grandfather had left for me and give it to Lily. It was like a punch to the gut, a reminder of every time they'd chosen her over me, of every time they'd made it clear that I was nothing more than an inconvenience in their lives. "What can I do about it?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage. Mr. Grant leaned back, his eyes narrowing as he considered my options. "You can take them to court. This is a clear case of fraud, and with these documents we have more than enough evidence to build a strong case. You have every right to claim what was left to you, and they should be held accountable for what they've done." It didn't take long for me to make my decision. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. They'd stolen from me, taken what was mine, and used it to benefit Lily just like they always had. But this time, they weren't going to walk away without facing the consequences. I was done being the silent victim, done letting them trample over me as if I didn't matter. I was going to fight, and I was going to win. The legal process was grueling, with court dates, depositions, and endless rounds of paperwork. My parents fought back, of course, denying everything and trying to paint themselves as innocent victims. They claimed they had only done what was best for the family, that they had used the money for Lily because she needed it more than I did. It was the same excuse I'd heard all my life, the same justification they'd used every time they'd put her needs above mine. But this time, it wasn't enough. Mr. Grant was relentless, tearing apart their defense piece by piece, exposing their lies and their deceit for all to see. The evidence was overwhelming, and as the trial dragged on, I could see the fear growing in their eyes. They knew they were going to lose, and they knew there was nothing they could do to stop it. The day the verdict was announced, I felt a sense of vindication like I'd never known. The judge ruled in my favor, declaring that my parents had indeed committed fraud and illegally accessed my inheritance. They were ordered to pay restitution, compensating me for the money they had stolen and for the emotional toll their actions had taken. For the first time in my life, I felt like I'd won. I'd taken back something they'd stolen from me, something they'd had no right to, and I'd made them face the consequences of their actions. After the trial, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. Winning the case wasn't just about the money, it was about finally standing up for myself, about refusing to be their victim any longer. I'd always felt powerless against them, like I was at their mercy, but now I knew that wasn't true. I had a voice, and I had the strength to use it. With the compensation I received, I was able to secure my future, to build a life that was truly my own, free from their influence and their toxicity. I cut all ties with them, refusing to allow them any more power over me. They'd shown me time and time again that they didn't care about me, that they'd never valued me, and I was done trying to make them see me done, trying to earn a place in a family that had never wanted me in the first place. It wasn't easy letting go of the idea of family, of severing the ties that had bound me to them for so long. But I knew it was the only way to move forward, to truly find peace and build a life on my own terms. I realized that family wasn't about blood. It was about love, about respect, about the people who stood by you when it mattered. My grandfather had shown me that. He had been the only person who had ever truly made me feel valued. And I knew now that I could carry his memory with me, that I could honor him by living a life that was free, that was mine. I continued to build my business, expanding it and watching it flourish. I made new friends, people who became like family to me, who supported me and believed in me in ways my blood relatives never had. I found a sense of belonging, a sense of peace that I'd never known growing up. And through it all, I held on to the lessons my grandfather had taught me, the love he'd given me, the belief he'd instilled in me. I could see how far I'd come, how much I'd grown, and I knew that I'd made the right choice. I'd broken free from the chains of a toxic family, from the lies and the betrayals, and I'd built a life that was truly my own. I'd found my strength, my resilience, and I knew that no matter what came next, I was ready to face it. I was finally free, finally at peace, and I knew that I had a future filled with possibility, a future that was mine to shape. I realized that family isn't always about who you're related to. It's about the people who care for you, who respect you, who stand by you when it matters. I'd found my family and the friends I'd made and the life I'd built, and I knew that my grandfather would have been proud. I had taken back what was mine. I had defended my right to live on my terms, and I was ready to embrace the life that lay ahead of me, free from the past, free from the pain. I was finally ready to live.